Picture this: the most powerful woman in the ancient world. Two of Rome's greatest generals. A love triangle so explosive it literally changed the course of history and brought down the Roman Republic. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy. This is the true story of Caesar, Cleopatra, and Mark Antony. And trust me, it's more twisted than any soap opera you've ever seen. What's up, history lovers? Today, we're diving into one of the most scandalous political and romantic dramas of all time. We're talking about a love triangle that involved assassinations, naval battles, suicide, and enough political intrigue to make Game of Thrones look like a children's story. But here's what makes this story so fascinating. This wasn't just about love and lust. This was about power, empire, and the clash between East and West that would determine who ruled the ancient world. So, grab your toga, because we're heading back to the 1st century BCE, where Rome's destiny hung in the balance between two of its most ambitious leaders and one Egyptian queen who played them both like a master chess player. Let's start with Cleopatra VII, because this woman was absolutely not the Hollywood stereotype you might be thinking of. First off, she probably wasn't even Egyptian. She was descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, making her Macedonian Greek. But here's what she was: brilliant, ruthless, and fluent in at least 9 languages. While most Ptolemaic rulers never even bothered to learn Egyptian, Cleopatra was the first in 300 years to actually speak the language of her people. She was a master diplomat, a skilled economist, and according to ancient sources, her real power wasn't her beauty. It was her intelligence and charisma. Now, when Cleopatra took the throne in 51 BCE, Egypt was rich but vulnerable. Rome was the rising superpower, and Egypt was essentially a client state trying not to get completely absorbed. Cleopatra needed a powerful Roman ally to survive, and in 48 BCE, fate delivered her one. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar. Picture this scene. Caesar arrives in Alexandria chasing his rival Pompey, only to discover that the Egyptians have already killed Pompey to curry favor with him. But Caesar's actually horrified. He wanted to defeat Pompey himself, not have him assassinated. Then something happens that's pure political theater. A carpet is brought before Caesar, and when it's unrolled, out steps the 21-year-old Queen of Egypt. Talk about making an entrance. Now, was this about love? Partly, but it was mostly about survival and power. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth to fund his civil wars. Cleopatra needed Rome's protection to keep her throne. It was the ultimate political alliance disguised as romance. And it worked. Caesar spent months in Alexandria, way longer than any general should spend away from politics in Rome. They had a son together, Caesarion, and Cleopatra even followed Caesar back to Rome, living openly as his mistress while he was married to someone else. But here's where it gets interesting. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra was scandalizing Roman society. Romans saw Egyptians as decadent and foreign, and many senators viewed Caesar's Egyptian affair as evidence that he was becoming too much like an Eastern king rather than a Roman leader. This resentment would prove fatal. On March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who claimed they were saving the Republic from tyranny. And just like that, Cleopatra lost her protector. But our story is just getting started. After Caesar's death, the Roman world exploded into chaos. 3 men emerged to fight for control: Caesar's adopted son Octavian, the military commander Lepidus, and Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony. Mark Antony was everything Caesar was, but turned up to 11. Charismatic, brilliant in battle, but also impulsive, prone to excess, and absolutely terrible at politics. If Caesar was a calculated risk-taker, Antony was pure controlled chaos. Initially, these 3 formed the Second Triumvirate, dividing the Roman world between them. Antony got the eastern provinces, which meant he got Egypt, which meant he got Cleopatra. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, and Cleopatra, being Cleopatra, decided to make this the most extra entrance in ancient history. She arrived on a golden barge dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, with her servants dressed as cupids and sea nymphs, burning the most expensive incense money could buy. Ancient historian Plutarch wrote that she came sailing up the river in a barge with gilded stern and outspread sails of purple, while oars of silver beat time to the music of flutes and pipes. Antony was completely smitten. But here's the thing, so was she. Unlike with Caesar, where it was clearly a calculated political move, with Antony there seemed to be genuine passion on both sides. What followed was a love affair that scandalized the ancient world. Antony essentially abandoned his Roman duties to live with Cleopatra in Alexandria. They formed something called the Society of Inimitable Livers, basically an exclusive club dedicated to the most extravagant parties and luxurious living imaginable. Ancient sources describe banquets where they'd spend the equivalent of millions of dollars on a single meal, where Cleopatra would dissolve pearls worth entire kingdoms in wine just to drink them, where they'd dress up as gods and goddesses for entertainment. But this wasn't just partying. This was politics. They were presenting themselves as divine rulers in the Eastern tradition, with Cleopatra as the reincarnation of Isis and Antony as the new Dionysus. They had 3 children together, and in 34 BCE, Antony made a declaration that would seal his fate: the donations of Alexandria. He declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings, made Caesarion the legitimate heir of Caesar, and gave their children kingdoms across the eastern Mediterranean. To Romans, this looked like treason. It looked like Antony was giving away Roman territories to a foreign queen and her children. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Octavian was watching all of this and building his case for war. Here's where our love triangle becomes a geopolitical nightmare. Octavian had been patient, consolidating power in Rome while Antony was living it up in Egypt. But Antony's actions gave him the perfect propaganda opportunity. Octavian portrayed this as a war between Roman values and Eastern decadence, between the legitimate heir of Caesar and a man who'd been corrupted by a foreign seductress. He declared war not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra, making her the enemy of Rome. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. It should have been Antony's victory. He had more ships, experienced crews, and the wealth of Egypt behind him. But something went wrong. In the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's ships suddenly retreated. Antony, seeing this, abandoned the battle to follow her. To this day, historians debate why this happened. Did Cleopatra panic? Was it a planned retreat? Did she betray Antony? We'll probably never know for sure, but the result was clear. Octavian won decisively. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, but they both knew it was over. Octavian's armies were closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. The end of this love triangle is pure Shakespearean tragedy. In August 30th BCE, as Octavian's forces entered Alexandria, everything fell apart. Antony received word that Cleopatra was dead, killed herself rather than be captured. Devastated, he fell on his sword in the Roman tradition. But here's the twist. Cleopatra wasn't actually dead. She'd spread the rumor as part of some desperate political gambit. When she learned that Antony was dying, she had him brought to her hiding place in her mausoleum. Ancient sources describe this heartbreaking scene where Antony died in Cleopatra's arms, both of them finally understanding that their grand dreams of ruling together were over. Cleopatra tried one last time to negotiate with Octavian, even reportedly trying to seduce him like she had Caesar and Antony. But Octavian was ice-cold, calculating, and completely immune to her charms. He wanted her alive for his triumph parade in Rome, the ultimate humiliation for the last pharaoh of Egypt. Rather than face that fate on August 12th, 33rd BCE, Cleopatra took her own life. The method is debated, probably poison, not the famous asp, but the result was final. The last pharaoh of Egypt was dead, and with her died the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled for 300 years. So, what's the legacy of this twisted love triangle? Well, it literally ended the Roman Republic. Octavian returned to Rome as the sole ruler, took the name Augustus, and became the first Roman emperor. The democratic system that had governed Rome for 500 years was over. Egypt became a Roman province, but the cultural impact of this story echoed through history. Shakespeare turned it into one of his greatest tragedies. Hollywood has made dozens of movies about it, and we're still talking about it 2,000 years later. But here's what I find most fascinating. This wasn't really a love triangle in the traditional sense. It was a political chess game played by three of the most ambitious people in ancient history, where love, lust, and power became so intertwined that they ultimately destroyed everything they were trying to build. Caesar wanted to be a god king. Antony wanted to rule the world. Cleopatra wanted to preserve her dynasty and her kingdom. In the end, none of them got what they wanted, except maybe Caesar, who did become divine in Roman religion, though he didn't live to see it. What do you think? Was this the greatest love story in history, or the most destructive political alliance? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient drama, make sure to subscribe for more stories from history that are stranger than fiction. Until next time, remember, the past is never as simple as it seems, and the truth is always more interesting than the legend.